Because Your People Matter, a playbook for management excellence. Written and read by John Berry and Sue Berry. First published in hardback edition in December 2018, second edition published in paperback and ebook in August 2020, both published by Grosvenor House, Tolworth, UK. This third edition was recorded as 12 chapters in autumn 2022 and is available on YouTube. Chapter 6. Setting Objectives. 6.1 Introduction. The general topic of objective setting and subsequent performance appraisal is hugely complicated and it's mired in myth. In the latter half of the 20th century, when most people worked for large firms, the annual round of objective setting and performance appraisal was commonplace. Then, generally, performance management was badly done. Managers assumed that by running a mechanistic process, performance would automatically come under control. But performance was and still is far too complex for that. As large firms fragmented and smaller firms rose, many commentators claimed that objective setting and performance appraisal was no longer useful for what they described as a new age of management. And yet nothing has successfully replaced this old science. Most managers, when asked about their employee performance, will be happy with most of the employees, about 70%. Of their employees, some, maybe up to 20%, will repeatedly perform well, and a small number, let's say 10%, will be stars. At the other end, managers will continually gripe about 30%, whose performance is typically below par, and managers will teeter on dismissing the worst 10%. The result is the now famous normal or bell curve applied to performance and shown in Figure 6.1. The spread of performance, however defined, and whatever the numbers, exists today in most firms. Some method of managing performance and improving it such that more employees move into the upper segments is therefore essential. Something is needed to produce a negative skew such that the performance of, let's say, 98% or more of the employees is good. This chapter is about the need for objective setting and performance appraisal and how to go about that to bring performance under control and achieve this sort of improvement. 6.2. Concept of performance improvement. Several high-profile consulting firms have become infamous for culling employees who perform poorly and are judged to be in the bottom 10%. Their practices draw the issue of performance management into sharp focus. Such extreme practice is understandable. Performance is almost all that matters to a firm. Good performance enables a sustainable firm. All other things being equal, performance generates the cash to fund ordinary and developmental activities. Poor performance will almost always see the firm's demise. And so there must be some system for ensuring that all employees perform. The culling example does, however, show one possible extreme approach to achieving acceptable performance across the workforce. Hire people each year knowing that you'll not always get the people needed and that you'll continually cull the bottom 10% the following year. A kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back strategy. An approach of culling and hiring new is perhaps valid, but is costly in every sense and certainly does not lead to a committed, motivated, engaged workforce. Simply, there must be better ways. 6.2.1. Basic ideas about performance appraisal. The simple idea behind objective setting and performance appraisal is that employees respond to objectives set in agreement with their manager. Done right, those objectives are motivating. As a result of mechanisms discussed in Chapter 5, the employee puts in more energy and the desired performance results. This performance is over and above any performance that would otherwise be achieved if no objectives were set. We've seen in other chapters too that management then proceeds in a closed-loop fashion with the manager sensing the performance and intervening to achieve the desired outcomes. The complexity comes when we look at how objective setting and performance appraisal is done. Performance management is made more complex by the fact that employees can be considered to exhibit one of two possible orientations: a growth orientation or an achievement orientation. These two mindsets determine what managers might achieve in objective setting and performance appraisal. Someone with a growth mindset will respond to growth activities. Someone with an achievement mindset will need other forms of objective. This chapter also expands our ideas in Chapter 2, where we expect the manager to measure the employee's performance and enable corrective action. So objective setting and performance appraisal is about how the manager sets objectives for each employee, and then how they appraise and manage the resulting performance to have the firm achieve its goals. 6.2.2 Maintaining performance. All managers need to achieve a level of performance in each employee and then work to have the employee sustain that. This simple idea gives us the dual management activity of performance appraisal and performance management. Figure 6.2 shows the idea of performance day by day, event by event, project by project, to sustain acceptable performance. Employee performance, however we measure it, will vary. Sometimes employees will excel, sometimes they'll not do so well. But their manager hopes that all employees will perform within expected bounds. Figure 6.2 shows two employees. Employee 1 performs within expected bounds for most of the time. Employee 2 has many episodes of poor performance. The first concept of performance appraisal and ultimately performance maintenance is that each employee needs to be told how they're doing. Generally, feedback on performance should be given soon after the performance events, and not left until some performance appraisal meeting months later. Then it's for the employee to internalize what's said and effect corrective action, if, of course, they are so motivated. Unfortunately, there's little evidence that simply telling an employee they're performing poorly is enough on its own. There's also significant evidence to suggest that criticism alone is damaging and will degrade performance further. Performance management is complex. Partly because of the two differing mindsets and partly out of difficulty in setting objectives for those in routine jobs, there's the view that objective setting and performance appraisal and its management applies only to white-collar jobs. The assumption is that because performance appraisal is a complex cognitive process, it is inappropriate for those outside professional and managerial groups. The argument is that staff who clean, service and sell need supervision day to day, hour by hour, and that development is not part of these jobs. We disagree, and there is nothing in the tools we describe here that precludes such application. It is for the manager to determine where and with whom they use these tools. 6.2.3 Growing Performance. The thrust of the argument is that managers can intervene in their employees' working lives, first to effect performance maintenance, and then to effect performance improvement by setting and agreeing objectives. So, is this true? Is there a cause and effect relationship between setting and managing objectives and the performance exhibited? The simple answer is yes. Recent studies show that, if done right, the more objectives are set and managed, the greater the performance realized. The caveat is, of course, that managers must get the process right, and to set and manage objectives to maintain performance is one thing, while doing so to improve performance is another. The latter has greater constraints and demands on the manager, and we will look at this later in the chapter. 6.2.4 Measurement and Metrics of Performance. Performance is a complex variable and will vary case by case, firm by firm. What matters to one manager is less significant to another. Let's look at some typical key performance indicators that might be used in objective setting. If performance is all that matters in a firm, then productivity is one of its primary antecedents. Productivity is the output for a given unit of input. The simplest method of calculating productivity is the turnover divided by the number of employees creating that turnover. Each employee contributes, some more directly than others. Take a metric like quality. One definition of quality is as a cost. The cost, for example, of revising work to correct errors. Again, everyone contributes, some more directly than others, and employees can be tasked to minimize quality costs. Similarly, safety can be calculated, perhaps the number of near misses or accidents, or the number of non-conformities to a safety plan when audited. And even nebulous measurements like involvement in external affairs can be made measurable. Then there are the financial metrics like sales and budget control, well-being, project delivery to time and budget, customer satisfaction, commitment of group members, engagement of employees with jobs, competencies, behaviours, internal affairs and communications. We could go on. All are ripe fields in which managers will find useful objectives. The aim ultimately is to set objectives that become the focus of the employee's attention and for the manager to hold them to account for a specific goal. 6.2.5 Role of the manager in performance improvement. The business of objective setting and performance appraisal was, historically for some, a simple matter of setting objectives at the beginning of the year and then appraising the performance of the employee a year later. Put so simple, it's no surprise that the activity failed. With such a cycle, when the time comes for the appraisal, life in the firm has moved on and many objectives are now irrelevant. Objective setting and performance appraisal begins when the manager determines strategy. Strategy leads to what the manager sees as necessary individual employee contribution. That contribution suggests a gap between what each employee is contributing today and what the manager would like them to contribute tomorrow. That leads to individual objectives. Objectives must be both short-term and longer term, and once set and agreed, the manager must continually review progress with the employee. As we argue in Chapter 2, under leadership, the manager's job never ends, and they must intervene to help each employee achieve their objectives. Management is closed loop. It's hands-on activity. Finally, to conclude these introductory sections, managers must remember the importance of job descriptions and person specifications. The job description defines the broad responsibilities and accountabilities of the job. In principle, each objective should fit within at least one job description, responsibility, or accountability. And the person specification defines the person who will excel in the role. In the end, if performance is not happening, and results from the feedback control loop suggest that it never will, the manager might have to admit that they've got the wrong person in the job. They might have to resort to culling. 6.3 Objectives, Motivation and Performance. 6.3.1 Basics of Motivation. Motivation theory tells us that staff will want to perform well in their jobs if certain things are present in the workplace. If the work is interesting and of significance, if it involves variety, if the role played is relatively clear, if co-workers are supportive, and if managers lead with consistency and integrity. Thus, individual performance comes from personal motivation and from the way the person is managed. So, if the individual is personally motivated and is also motivated by manager action, conceivably high performance will result. Systems thinking tells us that this is an open loop system. That is to say, we put personal motivation in and performance comes out. For more than hope to prevail, the system must operate in closed loop form. We must appraise the performance of an individual and feed this back to them to effect continued performance improvement. Where the loop is effective and good performance is realized, continued feedback sustains the performance by the manager, stroking and rewarding. In Chapter 2, we saw that leadership is an intervention on a person's motivation. Tactics like roadblock removal and leader-manager exchange can be used by the manager to influence that motivation. We also saw that goal illumination was a form of influencing. Goal illumination relies on there being goals or objectives in place to focus the employee's efforts. The manager then encourages the employee to expend more energy towards those objectives at the expense of other possible activities. There is a clear link here between objectives and motivation, facilitated by the manager. Firstly, the manager must set the objectives and have the employee adopt them. Secondly, the manager must continually work with the employee to illuminate the goals and use the raft of other leadership tactics in the manager's repertoire to help the employee succeed. During the various meetings about the progress on goals, the manager can provide the necessary feedback and monitor progress. By making this link between objectives and motivation, we've also shown that objective setting and performance appraisal is just another of the many leadership tactics available to managers. 6.3.2 about people and objectives. Employees typically have one of two mindsets: growth orientation or achievement orientation. For objectives to work for all, the manager must work with learning goals and performance goals. In line with other mindsets, people are oriented towards one or other goal type. A person who is a learning goal-oriented strives to improve their own performance by increasing their understanding of the world about them and about the tasks that perform part of their job. They believe that they achieve through learning. They recognize that to progress, they must seek genuine feedback on their performance and, in turn, set challenges and goals for themselves that further their learning. A person who is performance goal-oriented is motivated by their own achievements and sets new goals that are likely to result in further personal reward. They only seek and respond to positive feedback. They're only receptive to positive strokes. For them, performance leads to performance. Learning goal orientation is positively related to self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is the person's belief in their ability to succeed. Self-efficacy determines how a person approaches objectives. Someone with high self-efficacy believes that they can perform well, and that they are therefore likely to view challenges as something to be mastered, rather than something to be avoided. So someone with a learning goal orientation is also likely to be someone who grasps new challenges as exciting opportunities for learning. Performance goal orientation is found to be negatively related to self-efficacy. That is to say that someone who is performance goal oriented is not likely to have a strong belief in their ability to succeed. They are unlikely to see a new challenge as an opportunity to learn, but rather as an opportunity for personal reward. It's important to understand these two different orientations in people. Some people rise to challenges because they get some personal reward or gratification for achieving great things. Others rise to challenges because there's an opportunity for learning and self-betterment. Managers need to have different strategies for dealing with these two different orientations, and they need to understand the way feedback will be processed by people in either. Understanding these two orientations is key when using performance appraisal as part of the process of identification of training and development needs. The presence of two mindsets and the differing objectives needed to motivate them suggests a clear need to hire the right person for the job and to then use objectives in line with their orientation. 6.3.3 About money and motivation. The basic rule is that money, that is to say pay, bonuses and other economic benefits, is not a motivating force. Generally, the accepted wisdom is that money is a negative hygiene factor. If the employee believes that there's not enough of it, or if the method by which it's awarded to employees and colleagues is deemed unfair, it quickly becomes a demotivator. So for the manager-employee relationship to work, and hence for the whole idea of objective setting and performance appraisal to work, the whole money environment in the firm must be fair and well matched to the labour market. In many firms, the salary and benefit systems are broken, placing stress on other systems, such as those under discussion here. But for those who are achievement motivated, money may be seen as attractive because it allows them to buy things that they value in life. As a result, and for those employees, money has the capacity to focus behavior. Typically, bonuses and commission target specific financial metrics such as sales value. Managers need to be careful that the focusing of one employee on one single metric does not preclude other desirable behaviors and thwart achievement of other objectives. We discuss money further in Chapter 10. 6.4 Setting Objectives. Over the past 50 years or so, significant research has been published into objectives in a wide range of disciplines such as management, sport, medicine, and criminal justice. This research has concluded that there is a relationship between goal setting and performance. As a result, it's generally accepted that goal setting is effective in maintaining and improving performance. So, it works. But how should a manager use it? 6.4.1 About objectives and people. We saw above that objectives have a place in motivation because they assist in identifying what the employee must focus on. Objectives have a place in leadership too. They give the manager a reason for talking to and wanting to influence. We discussed in Chapter 2 that managers and employees need to be engaged in initiatives. Objectives are initiatives. Objectives demand persistence by defining the duration for which assignment of personal resources are necessary. A project starts when the objective is formed and accepted, and ends when the objective is complete. And objectives illuminate starkly the distance at any one time between the agreed result and the achievement so far. That gap energizes the employee. This all assumes that the objectives are specific to each employee. They must be of appropriate difficulty. Easy objectives don't motivate, and near impossible objectives demoralize. If the employee is a poor performer, setting objectives in the hope that they will suddenly excel will fail. The reasons for poor performance must first be understood and other interventions used. Objectives fundamentally demand that the employee has the required competencies and behaviors. The employee, in accepting the objectives, must be familiar with what's to be done. Where tasks are routine, the objectives must be clear, specific, and achievable. On the other hand, when tasks are complex, specific objectives will likely narrow the focus unnecessarily. 6.4.2 The role of objectives in business. The idea is simple enough. At the firm level, the manager, often in conjunction with the board, determines what the firm should achieve in the coming years. Here are some examples of corporate objectives. Using skills and market position in the fine dining sector, develop into the Italian restaurants market, achieving 10% market share in the region within 3 years. Using the parent company's patents in mathematical modeling, develop a series of PC-based modeling tools for the engineering consulting market. And closing the smaller cafes and consolidating staff in the restaurants in the main towns in the region to fight off competition and sustain a current 40% market share in the family restaurant segment. Now, each of those three is some departure from the firm's current position. Each is specific. Each employee has a contribution to make, and it's just a question of how this contribution is defined. A turnover objective of, say, £2.5 million for invoicing in a company of 25 people means £100,000 per person. That doesn't mean that everyone is responsible for turnover directly, just that in each sector, a metric translated to per person is easily benchmarked with other firms of differing sizes and differing turnovers. A turnover of £2.5 million for a firm with a sales staff of 5 means £500,000 per head. While some may be senior and some junior, the objectives need to balance out to give the top-line figure of £2.5 million. Likewise, a turnover of £2.5 million at a sales success rate of 30% means quotes to the tune of £8.3 million. If each job is typically worth 20k, this means over 400 individual quotes. If each customer typically asks for 2 quotes a year, this means around 200 customers. Given 200 customers asking for quotes and a conversion of 100 possible clients to 1 actual client, say, this means that marketing must reach 20,000 people with a possible need for the firm's services. It's a cascade from potential customers to hard orders described by the sales funnel. The model is shown in Figure 6.3. This shows how the 3 departments of marketing, sales, and operations are linked through departmental objectives. Whatever the actual figures, this shows that a high-level objective yields individual department objectives and ultimately individual personal objectives. Each objective needs the manager to say how it will be achieved, and this then loops back to strategy. The how says how the higher-level objectives will be met. The turnover objective of 2.5 million in this example will need 5 sales staff, say. But if there are only 3 today, this then needs a strategy that will recruit 2 new heads in time to be effective to assure the objective met. And if it needs a marketing strategy that will generate enough leads for the 2 new heads to develop an effective pipeline, and so on. Objectives make the strategy real and achievable. 6.4.3 Setting Organizational Objectives. In 1996, Kaplan and Norton described what they termed a balanced scorecard for the expression of strategy. An example balanced scorecard is shown in Figure 6.4. The idea of the balanced scorecard is to expand strategic thinking and execution away from just turnover and profit to finances, process, customers, and employees. The thinking is that the 4 cover all dimensions in a typical firm. Some may argue that there's a level above the balanced scorecard covering corporate values. There's also been some discussion about the need to express strategy simply as, because A has a problem with B, we reckon that if we do C to D, we'll get E. The point really is that however strategy is stated at the level of the firm, it can be broken down to show the contribution of each person, and that's what we're interested in here. 6.4.4 Setting Group Objectives. The cascade from firm to employee transits all groups or divisions. The sales group, the R&D group, the finance group. Clearly, objectives can be set at all levels. In so doing, we move from the psychological in-person mechanisms about objectives to the social group mechanisms. And we discuss group dynamics in Chapter 5. Interdependent objectives can contribute to the performance overall, giving the group a shared purpose and a reason to discuss progress. We would argue, however, that most firms function with cooperative employees as group members rather than through highly integrated and cohered teams. Employees cooperate. They need personal objectives, and they can then cooperate with one another to achieve those. Interdependent objectives are difficult to set up and manage, and they're too easily decimated by the unhelpful group processes that are quite normal in firms. 6.4.5 Setting Personal Objectives. So how does the manager go about setting objectives? We've argued that objectives should be developed from the firm's overall strategy. There are 2 inefficiencies in this perfect process. Firstly, not all employee objectives will be achieved. If all employees are competent and motivated, a manager might optimistically expect that their employees will achieve 70% of all objectives. The manager's analysis will need to accommodate this risk, and mitigate it by setting objectives whose outcomes overlap. Now, clearly, conflicting objectives must be avoided. Of course, in this state, if all objectives are achieved, the firm will overachieve, but no one will be unhappy about that. And secondly, there may be good reason to set objectives for personal growth that don't stem directly from the corporate picture. But those aside, the corporate balance scorecard can then be developed to yield individual balance scorecards for each employee. Forcing the balance scorecard structure might seem overly rigid, but like all tools, it should be used and molded to the manager's needs. The key benefit is simply that it encourages everyone to develop balanced objectives, accepting a financial, process, customer, and people aspect to every employee's working life. Finally, there's an argument that when employee tasks are complex, very specific objectives should be avoided because they focus too narrowly on a few obvious outcomes at the possible exclusion of others with higher contribution. In the end, it's for the manager and the employee to agree what objectives are most useful. 6.4.6 Involving employees in setting objectives. There's a debate in organizational psychology circles about just how objectives should come to be introduced to the employee. Should the employee, for example, on knowing what's needed in their job, propose objectives? Taken to the limit, should they be invited to set their own objectives? The argument here is that it will be so much easier to gain commitment to self-set objectives. Or should the manager set the objectives following the logic that we describe and then tell and sell those to the employee? Clearly, with self-set objectives, the management overhead to educate the employee is huge. And for most employees, it's simply not needed. Asking the employee to set their own objectives or propose objectives given the organizational need, is a misguided, romantic notion. In fact, research suggests that manager-set objectives are significantly more potent. As a result, this sits better with most managers. Provided that the dyadic relationship between manager and employee is sound, the employee will be happy to commit to objectives that the manager and firm need. After all, that's something that they can give as part of the overall manager-employee exchange process. But of course, beware, exchange is two-way and managers will need to reciprocate in due course. 6.5. Defining performance. Outside of working with objectives, performance is hugely difficult to measure. Take our waiter in 5.2.6. What metrics ought we to use to judge their performance? Is it the sales value per week per waiter? Or are responses in a customer questionnaire helpful? Or is the number of tips given by customers a better measure? For a waiter, much depends on the tables to which they are assigned. And of course, there's even more complex need for the waiters to support and cover for one another. How on earth do we judge all that? Performance is probably the most important and yet the most difficult word in the manager's dictionary. So, when a manager is considering implementing performance appraisal, they must think carefully. 6.5.1 Performance dependencies. However we judge it, a job holder's performance is always dependent on many facets of the job. All jobs are a combination of human competence and technology function. Productivity can also often be enhanced by giving the job holder improved tools. And productivity can be enhanced by improving the personal competencies and behaviours. Job holders' work will also be dependent on other group members. No one works in isolation. From a customer's perspective, a waiter's performance will depend on the performance of the chef. An operative in a car manufacturing plant will depend on the robots and on the programming of those robots by production engineers. And a software developer will depend heavily on colleagues who have determined the system architecture and design. We discussed below how performance assessment might be done. Managers should ensure that anyone assessing others understands the complexity of the assessment task and the determination of the root cause of performance. 6.5.2 Performance in an evolving environment. Finally, we should remember that firms change year by year. Pressures on and in the firm are different. New contracts are won, new technology is implemented, and staff come and go. Dependencies change. Managers will be keen to compare this year's performance with last for each employee to see trends and corroborate beliefs. Firms' environments change, and comparison of employees' year-on-year performance is difficult and error-prone. 6.6 Appraising performance. 6.6.1 The use of rating. In rating an employee's performance, managers must be clear about the use to which those ratings are to be put. There are two obvious options for use. First, for development, and second, for what some academics term administration. The second reason is to set pay, plan succession, and make promotions. Our opinions are clear, and we'll elaborate further below. Any system used for such emotive purposes as development and administration that involve employees, managers, and colleagues will inevitably be open to distortion and bias, and managers should tread carefully. 6.6.2 Rating performance. Performance can often be split into two: task performance and contextual performance. Task performance is, as it implies, how well somebody performs the tangible aspects of the job. In a hotel, it would be the waiter's performance in delivering the right food to the right table at the right time. Contextual performance, on the other hand, is the way in which the delivery is made. For example, did the waiter smile, and as a result, how did the customer feel? The idea of splitting performance in two is shown in figure 6.5. The basic idea is that performance comes from behavior, and the performance goes on to realize outcomes. And this has been common throughout the book as a central model. The variables from the previous diagrams have now been split in figure 6.5. Contextual performance is significant because it often determines whether the customer will visit the hotel again. Contextual performance is a major contributor to competitive advantage. It is also a measure of employees' extra-to-role behaviors. Contextual performance is seldom written in the job description, but it would likely be at the forefront of everyone's mind when recruiting new members of staff. A willingness on the part of the employee to offer extra-to-role behavior comes substantially from their personality and motivation, remembering that motivation depends on how well their manager taps their intrinsic and extrinsic motives. Figure 6.5 shows that contextual performance is influenced by intelligence, and specifically by what is termed an individual's emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is part innate and part learned. High performance is therefore as much about positive behaviors and the presence of extra-to-role behaviors as it is about tangible, positive outputs. Ratings of performance must cover both forms. 6.6.3 Doing rating. Human judgment is hugely subjective. It's very difficult for a manager to avoid giving an opinion about a subordinate's performance without that opinion being open to question. Humans make judgments about others in a social environment such as a firm, and inevitably that will be subject to bias and political influence. Research shows that if a manager likes the subordinate, a more favourable assessment will result. Research also shows that the opinion of a peer about another person's performance is influenced by what reward the assessing peer might subsequently get because of their judgment. And we might say that these failings are simply human nature. There are 5 possible rater groups: self, boss or bosses, subordinates, peers, and customers, and perhaps suppliers. Many large firms favour use of all 5 and use technology to capture those opinions. Managers in smaller firms are likely to only consider their own rating, whilst perhaps polling others for anecdotal and unstructured views. One of the main aims of having so many raters giving so many different points of view is to increase the appraisee's self-awareness. Self-awareness can be defined as the degree of agreement between the appraisee's self-assessment of their performance and the way that their performance is viewed by the other rater groups. There are 4 primary measures of quality in performance appraisal. First, reliability, the extent to which a measure is free from error with temporal stability and internal consistency. Temporal stability is the idea that if a rating is given at one point in time, the same rating score will be given again by the same rater a few months later. In other words, it's the requirement that the rating is not influenced by immediate events, but is a balanced view. Internal consistency is the idea that raters will consistently apply the same criteria across all appraisees. And second, convergent validity, that there is agreement in all views of all raters, for example, between self and supervisor ratings and between self and peer ratings. Then bias, differences between ratings and evaluations because of belief or other factor. The example mentioned above is leniency. If a manager likes a subordinate, they're likely to give a more lenient rating. Predictive validity, the degree to which measurement of past performance is a means of predicting future performance rather than simply recording history. This is of particular interest in succession planning and in determining training and development needs. So, to summarize, in implementing performance appraisal, managers will want to know that ratings were reliable and not influenced by the moment or given using varying criteria. They were convergent, tending to a single rating. They were not subject to undue bias, and they were useful in predicting future performance. These requirements are tough to achieve and may explain why there's little consistency in opinion about how performance appraisal should be done. Some believe that using all 5 rater groups better meets the requirement, whereas others consider that there are so many errors introducing in a multi-rater system that old-fashioned manager-employee appraisal still has greatest merit. 6.6.4 Multi-rater systems. So let's assume that the manager is giving an opinion on the employee's performance. This is the reference case against which all other possibilities are evaluated. Researchers have found that allowing employees to participate in their own appraisal may make them more aware of and committed to performance goals. There is therefore a significant argument in favour of self-appraisal. Individuals are, however, more lenient in their opinions than others, although this leniency diminishes with self-appraisal training. Subordinates may also appraise. Subordinate ratings may also be somewhat lenient, since they may feel that they have to live with the fallout of their opinions in months to come. Peers, those of a similar grade in the firm, may also be asked for a view. Peers tend to pay more attention to the degree to which the appraisee helps them achieve their objectives, rather than perhaps focusing on the appraisee's own outputs. Peers may therefore measure organizational citizenship behaviors more than that of others. And finally, customers and suppliers could be asked for an opinion. In some senses, the customer's view is the real view that matters to the firm, because it is an assessment of the firm's competitive advantage. How, then, does one proceed? Each appraiser group has some bias. Some will be more lenient than others. Some will be politically influenced. Some, such as the manager, or managers in a matrix structure, will focus on task performance, whereas others will be more interested in how the appraisee helped them achieve their goals. One could simply take an average of all ratings. One could also plot the ratings and seek a median. And note that plotting the ratings can result in a complex, sometimes multimodal distribution being realized, rather than something where a single central tendency is obvious. The fact that the frequency distribution of ratings might be complex shows one of the failings of taking a simple average. The single result can mask a host of issues with one or more rater group. This issue of how to process the ratings from multiple sources is one of the key problems with the 360-degree or multi-source, multi-rater appraisal systems. Just because there are now many more judgments does not make the final rating awarded any less subjective and introduces potentially huge error with one group or other skewing the results. 6.7. Appraisal and personal development. Typically, managers in concluding appraisals aim to review existing employee objectives, discuss obstacles that prevented those objectives being met, give and discuss the all-important performance rating, and then discuss forward-looking topics such as the employee's need for training and development, their prospects for promotion, and their long-term potential. As we've discussed, the objective setting and review elements can give huge benefits, but both are complex. Possibly the most easily won benefits in running a performance appraisal scheme is when the primary purpose of the appraisal is personal development. Here the manager can gain enhanced competencies and behaviors and enhanced commitment, and if other necessary conditions are met, enhanced engagement with the job. But there is one huge caveat. The right person must be in the right job. 6.7.1. The right person in the right job. We've illustrated a comprehensive model of employee performance in Chapter 5. This illustrates that the performance depends, on the one hand, on the job and the environment of the job, and on the other, the personal characteristics of the job holder. In discussing the prospect of developing the person, we are suggesting a planned change to those personal characteristics. As we see from the model, there's significant scope to effect improvement. We discuss how this might be done more fully in Chapter 8. All personal development depends fundamentally on the foundations upon which the employee is to build. For every competency and for every behavior, there are prerequisites. Let's consider those prerequisites for a salesperson. Firstly, they need to be numerate, able to add, subtract, multiply, divide, to manage pricing and margins. If they don't have this foundation, no amount of development will bring the employee to be able to sell. So these prerequisites center in turn on core competencies and core behaviors. Secondly, they need to want to meet people and interact with them. This comes from their personality. If the salesperson is not somewhat extroversive, they'll naturally find the people side of selling difficult. And they need the right level of intelligence. Bright people learn easily. The manager may believe that they can develop the job holder by using the performance appraisal system, but they will fail if they don't have the right person in the job. 6.8. Setting objectives and doing performance appraisal. Doing objective setting and objectives management and performance appraisal and development management is no small undertaking for a manager. As we show in Figure 6.6, it comprises 4 phases, and there are likely 5 key milestones at which certain documents must be in place before proceeding. These documents are shown as boxes with wavy bottoms and a document title within. Manager and employee action at the milepost, the MP, is shown in speech bubbles. Manager status is noted at the foot of the milepost. We recommend that the manager develops their own documentation that meets the needs of the firm. Picking up off-the-shelf forms is wrong. That adopts a process and documents that somebody else thinks are important, and whatever the content, those forms are unlikely to suit you, your firm, and your employees. We've not suggested a timescale for the round. This depends entirely on the firm's needs. At the longest, the full cycle should be run annually. However, priorities often change within the year, requiring resetting of objectives. In any case, the manager must manage employee progress week by week. The whole process is, however, a sizable task, and any thought of running the cycle in less than, say, 3 months is probably unrealistic. It's possible that the objective setting phases may be completed every 6 months, with the manager and each employee sitting down in an appraisal meeting every 3 months. Informal catch-up meetings might then be held monthly or even fortnightly. Objective setting and performance management meetings are like quality audits. It's easy to put them off, and eventually they catch up with you. Putting them off destroys any benefits thus far realized. Managers should get used to the meetings as an integral part of their management life. 6.8.1 Objectives and appraisal meetings. Of prime importance are the feelings, attitudes, and beliefs that the manager wants the employee to leave the meeting with. We would suggest that the employee should leave smiling rather than spitting. There are established, proven tools for giving feedback to staff. It's essential that all managers are trained in their use. And there are established methods for having difficult conversations with staff to reach a positive outcome. Managers must be familiar with those too. The meeting must therefore be planned. If there is to be a difficult discussion, that had best be done in the middle. Then there's time to congratulate and build on all the positives at the beginning, and recover the meeting and leave on a positive note at the end. Adequate time must be allowed for all eventualities. If the manager cuts the meeting short in response to other priorities, this signals a lack of commitment to the process and will counter any good work done. We recommend that managers allow 2 hours for an appraisal meeting. The manager should not schedule any commitments within 1 hour of the planned meeting close to allow for overrun. In any case, managers will soon learn how much time is needed for objective setting and performance appraisal meetings in their firm. More frequent but less formal meetings should be scheduled too, but these will take much less time. Objective setting and performance appraisal meetings are fundamentally meetings between individuals. This places a responsibility on the manager to avoid a tell and sell. Objectives and criticisms will be accepted if due time is given for discussion. The manager must be prepared to change their mind. This builds trust in the process. The manager's approach should be one of coach, as the facilitator of understanding. They are in charge, but it does not do to impress this on the employee. We discussed the advantages of adopting non-directive leadership style in Chapter 2. 6.8.2 Process pitfalls. Firstly, managers have in the past been overly inclined to sign up to the process of performance appraisal in the belief that the process alone will yield due benefit. They believed that simply collating and giving multi-rater feedback was enough to cause performance change. It wasn't. The result has been a host of books saying that performance appraisal is a terrible technique, only for the authors of those books to advocate implementation of some performance appraisal by another name. Dogmatically following process in search of a benefit has led to development of a host of smartphone and computer apps for 360-degree feedback, as if for collecting and giving feedback are all managers need do. In general, research does not support the assertion that the receipt of feedback alone, and specifically feedback from multiple sources, will motivate individuals to improve their performance. Similarly, goals alone are not enough. It's a 3-part system involving setting, reviewing, and improving through development. Secondly, we note that managers must decide why they want to implement objective setting and performance appraisal. As we noted earlier, there are 2 reasons, typically administration and development. Administration links objective setting and appraisal to pay, to promotion, and to succession. Development links the process to business planning, motivation, and progress. They're not mutually exclusive, but managers must take care in biasing the objective setting and performance appraisal to money. Remember, money does not motivate and can encourage all the wrong behaviors. Taken to the limit, a company system orientated to raw achievement with a focus on financial rewards will likely result in a cadre of narcissistic employees high in the need for personal or P power. Such firms are characterized by tears, fears, and high staff turnover. Thirdly, running an objective setting and performance management system as we describe it here takes manager competence and the right manager behaviors. Unless managers have been trained, it's unlikely they will have those from the outset. Manager development is essential to excel in objective setting and performance appraisal. There are many necessary competencies and behavior. These are mostly common with those needed to be a good manager. For a list, we'd refer readers to the 23 competencies and behaviors outlined by Richard Boyatzis in his book, The Competent Manager, and those are summarized here. 6.8.3 Power in Performance Appraisal. Managers should be aware that as soon as people come together in social environments such as the firm, there will be political activities throughout, with individuals trying to influence others towards their way of thinking. The performance appraisal has, as its outcome, both benefits and rewards, and disbenefits and sanctions for all the participants. The result is that both managers and employees will work the system to achieve what is best for them. Commonly, power is the mechanism by which the manager effects behavioral change in an employee. Power is also the mechanism by which the employee influences the manager to ensure a good rating, a pay rise, and favourable future work. Both manager and subordinate hold some power, but often one will have the upper hand. Power can therefore be unilateral or bilateral, imbalanced or balanced. Unless controlled, both parties will use their power to distort the performance appraisal outcome in their favour. Power comes from several sources. First, authority. The manager is the boss and hence holds legitimate power through appointment. The manager is also the one who grants meaningful reward, like a pay rise. It also comes from social class. One party is from a higher class than the other and hence is seen as holding power. And then charisma. The employee is in awe of the manager and would follow them anywhere. Charismatic managers influence because employees want a share in the limelight that goes with that charisma. Then there's expertise. The manager is trained and is seen to have higher expertise. Or perhaps power in the reverse direction exists because the employee knows how to do the job while the manager doesn't. Then there's persuasion. The manager is acknowledged as being better at using argument to persuade, or vice versa. Either party may be an accomplished arguer, making the other disinclined to enter the debate. And knowledge. One party is known to have greater knowledge about the job, the market, or the firm. And finally, moral persuasion. Drawing on moral argument, one party is acknowledged to be able to persuade the other. This is not just restricted to charities and public services like teaching, though it's here where perhaps moral arguments for action pervade. And finally, tradition. It's always been the case that one person holds power over the other. Ultimately, the manager must act to move the performance appraisal from a tell and sell meeting to a joint problem-solving activity where the aim is to develop the employee to improve competence and to encourage behavior. That way, the manager gets what they want and the employee progresses. With that done, the performance appraisal moves from a polarized event in which power determines outcome to a social exchange activity. In this, both parties desire something of the activity without necessarily expecting specific action in specific timescales. In this case, both want to progress. And in fact, this idea of exchange continues from performance appraisal into everyday management. If both manager and employee are set to benefit and both believe that benefit is equitable, though not necessarily equal, both will come to the table with balanced power. Under such conditions, the performance appraisal stands to yield maximum perceived justice in the employee's mind with maximum benefit for all. 6.8.4 The do's and don'ts of objectives. As we indicate, there's a lot to think about to make objective setting and performance appraisal work as a management tool. Here are some do's and don'ts from our experience. Make the whole meeting and the process at any point in time personal to the employee. Don't treat it like a huge machine calling out metaphorically, "Next, who's next in line?" Keep the process and each meeting simple. Take and share handwritten notes. Keep a master file for each employee. Do allow employees to self-assess their achievements and performance and provide evidence in discussion. Remember that a manager-led goal has more potency. Do train yourself and all employees such that you and they come to understand how objective setting and performance appraisal fits in the overall company objectives. Be prepared to support development with appropriate funding, so don't go into a meeting knowing there's a need for development without the funds to make it happen. Your needs, the manager's needs, the needs of the firm, and the needs of each employee will change over the coming year. Be prepared to respond with additional meetings and be ready to reset objectives. Remember that you're playing with the psychological contract, the understanding that your employees have about their relationship with you and the firm. Earn their trust always. Never force rankings or guide rate of feedback. Don't seek to identify those at the bottom of the scale ready to dismiss or discipline. That's a failing on you. Think beforehand about how you want the person to leave the meeting, spitting or smiling. Having employees leave angry or aggrieved does nothing for future performance. Keep a sense of how the meetings and the process overall are going. Make changes to the process and how you conduct the meetings. Learn from each meeting. Collect feedback about each employee's performance over the year or other period and make sure there's plenty of evidence. Never open discussions with, "I think that you." Always seek objectivity. Be open to change your opinion considering additional evidence, but be forceful if you believe your evidence trumps this. Strive for procedural justice. Remember that employees talk and each will have shared their experiences with colleagues. Treat all equitably. And finally, focus more on the positives of employee achievements and the performance than the negatives, and take care not to be portrayed as the bearer of bad news. Don't just act as judge and critic. 6.8.5 Evolving the process. Objective setting and performance appraisal must be tuned to work for the manager, their firm, and the employees. So every system is going to be unique. No manager is going to get their objective setting and performance appraisal system right first time. So the process will evolve. Of course, it's important to get started, but in some ways, where it starts is less important than asking the employees about how they feel about the process and reacting to their feedback. After all, if they're happy with the process and feel they will benefit from engaging with it, the system is likely to be fair and worthwhile. If the manager is happy with the way the process runs, it's very likely the system will benefit the firm. And if for some reason it doesn't, it must be changed. Running objective setting and performance appraisal is too costly to continue to run a broken system. 6.9 Chapter Summary. The idea behind objective setting and performance appraisal is simple enough, but the complexity comes in doing it. It's a narrow arête that defines success, and the drops either side of the metaphoric ridge are steep. It's easy for managers to fall at various points along the way. At the outset, managers will set high-level objectives for the performance of the firm. Conceivably, if the manager doesn't ripple these objectives down to the employees, the high-level objectives won't be met. We illustrate how a firm aiming to turn over £2.5 million might develop objectives for its staff. This idea of rippling down objectives from the central corporate objectives has merit. But even with a high degree of objectivity and linking to the firm's fortunes, it's still difficult to set measurable objectives for all. We use the example of a waiter to discuss why this is. Ultimately, managers need to set objectives in the tangible business metrics of performance, productivity, quality, and the minimizing of waste, and safety. We illustrate how the accountabilities in an employee's job description should link to their objectives. The objectives make the job description accountability specific and current. This illustrates the key importance of a well-crafted job description, setting out at a high level what the job holder is to achieve. Ultimately, we argue that objectives have a key role in making performance management central in launching initiatives. Initiatives and their associated objectives give managers reason to intervene day to day in the business lives of their people. Intervention enables leadership and ensures success in those initiatives. Management will fail without accountabilities, objectives, and initiatives. Some academics argue that setting objectives stifles creativity, and there is truth here. Narrow objectives can be set where the desired outcomes are specific, but broad outcomes like ensuring success might be used in complex business scenarios with unclear end goals. Objectives for research scientists will look very different from those of a project engineer. The latter will likely be broad, whereas the former will concentrate on delivering contracted outcomes. We don't subscribe, though, to the idea that objective setting is only useful for white-collar employees. We argue that it's wrong for professional and managerial types to have a monopoly on sitting with their manager to discuss performance. We argue that all the performance of all employees can benefit from goal theory. In search of the practical, we advocate the use of a balanced scorecard to entice managers to spread attention across 4 aspects of management: finance, process, customers, and employees. In the end, financial goals will be achieved by action in the other 3 quadrants. Performance is a complex metric. We believe that splitting it into task performance and contextual performance helps understanding and the setting of meaningful objective goals. Splitting also helps identify where personal development may be needed for goal satisfaction. Many employees fail to master the softer skills of contextual performance, and in that case, it's there where managers must focus. Turning to performance appraisal, we look at the various ways that appraisal might be done. We evaluate the use of multidimensional multi-rater systems and highlight some of the issues and dangers. In appraisal, it's very easy to catastrophically damage trust and the psychological contract, and hence who is invited to offer a rating on an employee should be decided with care. Finally, we look at the skills needed by managers in objective setting and performance appraisal, and we draw on BIATSI's 23 manager competencies. We argue that the manager must be multi-competent. They must be prepared to train for management, and that will naturally cover the essential skills and the knowledge for objective setting and performance appraisal. We discuss a paperwork trail and a timescale for the process of the appraisal round, suggesting that objective setting and performance might be run on a 6-monthly cycle with interim review meetings every few weeks. Finally, we discuss the detail of objective setting and appraisal meetings. We highlight the critical question: how is it that the manager wants the employee to leave the meeting? And then we suggest the do's and don'ts to help managers stay on the ridge with trust intact.